Chapter 29, Duty. Jon had anticipated that the apology would come right after the tournament ended. With everyone gathered in one place, he thought Edmure would step up, deliver his apology, and that would be that. But for reasons unknown to him, perhaps some unseen protocol or Jon Arryn's intervention, he found himself waiting another day. That was fine by him. It was then that Jaime approached him, saying he needed to meet someone at the tavern early the next morning. After the justs concluded and the crowd dispersed, Jon barely had a moment to speak with Margaery, let alone return her favor. Each time he glanced at the small ribbon she had given him, a smile crept onto his face. They had exchanged gifts before, on name days and for other occasions, but this was different. This was the first thing she had given him that truly belonged to her, and it felt special. The rest of the night had been a blur. Joy wandered around, wearing her rose garland like a crown, looking every bit the princess, or queen, that Jaime had crowned her. In Jon's eyes, she had always been that. Geryon kept joking about the fish floundering on the ground, and at one point, he even fell to the ground, performing what Jon thought was a pretty accurate impression. Tyrion chimed in, claiming he had made more coin that day than the mines would ever produce. Jon knew it was a jest, but he couldn't help but wonder how much he had actually bet, especially since both he and Jaime had won. He suspected a lot. The highlight of the celebrations had to be when Ghost spotted Jon's shield and lined up in front of it. Watching his wolf snarl at the painted image was enough to make Jon laugh uncontrollably. At one point, Ghost even bumped his nose against the hardwood, whether trying to attack the other wolf or steal the fish painted on it, Jon couldn't tell. But the wolf's reaction had everyone in stitches. "Come here, you silly furball," Jon called as Ghost trotted over. He reached out and gently petted the wolf's head, feeling a sense of warmth and camaraderie. Jon grabbed some of the meat from the plate in the center of the table and offered it to Ghost. "Here, we can't have you eating a floppy fish, it might upset your stomach," he said with a laugh. As the night wore on, fatigue hit Jon all at once. He bid goodnight to Loras, Jaime, and the others before making his way to his room. He took the egg from the fire and curled up beside it in bed, the little green and gold ribbon still tied to his arm. He fell into a dreamless sleep and was grateful for it, waking refreshed and ready for the day ahead. After breaking his fast, Jon watched as Jaime and Loras headed to the Red Keep. Jaime was off to meet Lady Olenna, and Loras was acting as his squire for the day. Jon met up with Allers and Jors, and together with Ghost, they walked to the tavern. He intended to meet whoever was waiting for him and then make his way to the Red Keep to get the apology over with. Margaery had suggested they spend the rest of the day visiting orphanages and distributing supplies, planning to do the same in Flea Bottom the following day. He wasn't sure which he looked forward to more, helping those in need or spending more time with Margaery. "So, did you make some coin yesterday?" he asked his guards. "Aye, Jon, on both you and Lord Jaime," Allers replied with a smile. "What about you, Jors?" "Aye, me too." "You think I'd let this one have all the fun?" Jors said, motioning to Allers. "You had us worried, though. When you lost your shield, I thought you were done for. How'd you manage to stay on Winter?" "Really? You've seen him on her. The boy's half horse, aren't you, Jon?" Allers chuckled, and they both laughed. When they finally reached the tavern, the serving girl immediately led Jon upstairs. He nodded to Jors and Allers to grab a drink and followed behind, handing the girl a few coppers once he reached the door. After knocking, he entered to find Ser Barristan and another figure waiting for him. A large, dark-haired man with deep-set eyes stood in the room as Jon closed the door behind him. Ghost raced ahead, bounding straight toward the stranger. Jon watched as the wolf sniffed the man, then returned to lay down beside him. "My king, may I present Ser Richard Lonmouth," Barristan announced. Jon gasped, disbelief flooding his senses. "You? I thought you were dead," he exclaimed, staring at the man who seemed to shake off the shock of a large wolf approaching him. "I thought so too, Your Grace." It seems I was mistaken, Richard replied, a bright smile breaking across his face. Jon's mind raced. Richard had been his father's squire, alongside Miles Mouton. The two had been as close to his father as Jon and Loras were to Jaime. A whirlwind of questions filled his thoughts, stories, tales, experiences, but one question rose above the rest. "Did you know about my mother?" Jon asked, his voice trembling. Your Grace, I did," Richard said, his tone turning somber. "Can you tell me? Were they happy?" Jon struggled to articulate the words. "Your father was a melancholy man, Your Grace. He often fell into quiet spells, lost in his thoughts. During those times, only Arthur could reach him. Miles and I would get a smile from him and be sent on our way, but Arthur, he was your father's closest friend, would sit with him and talk. Eventually, your father's mood would lift, and things would return to normal. But when he met your mother, everything changed. He changed. We had never seen him like that before. He smiled more, became more outgoing. Don't get me wrong, Your Grace, he was always a charmer. But with your mother, he was happy, truly happy." They were happy, Richard shared, and a smile crept onto Jon's face. "Please, call me Jon," he said, looking at Richard. "I cannot, Your Grace." "You are my king," Richard replied, and Jon looked at him in surprise, absorbing the weight of the moment. He watched as Sir Richard. Jon stood up and walked over to Sir Richard Lonmouth, then knelt before him. He glanced at Sir Barristan, who nodded in encouragement. "I, Sir Richard Lonmouth, hereby pledge my fealty to the one true king, Jaehaerys Targaryen III of his name. I pledge my sword, my counsel, and my life in service to him, from this day until my last day," Richard declared. Jon rose and smiled at the knight. "You shall always have a place by my hearth, with meat and mead at my table. I promise to ask no service of you that might bring you dishonor. I swear it by the old gods and the new. Arise, Sir Richard." Jon was taken aback when he noticed Richard wiping away tears that fell from his eyes. He and Barristan gave him a moment to compose himself before continuing their conversation. "Sir Richard is your master of whispers, my king," Barristan said. Jon paused, caught off guard. "Master of whispers? Why would I need a master of whispers?" Then it struck him, they were all in the great game now. His thoughts turned to Jaime. He sat in the small solar that Olenna had established as her office. Loras was spending time with their mother and sister, while their father was already at a meeting with the Hand. Upon arriving at the Tyrell's quarters, he had been quickly ushered into the solar. Olenna, despite being in a meeting with one of the Reach Lords, had left word to join him as soon as he arrived. True to her promise, she didn't keep him waiting long. The Lady of the Reach entered, flanked by her two massive guards. It always amused Jon to hear her refer to them as left and right. The twins were practically identical and never participated in tournaments or sparred. Jon couldn't tell if they were incredibly skilled swordsmen or mere showmen, though he doubted the latter. He took a seat as Olenna settled in, a servant arriving almost immediately with wine and cheese. Jon was handed a glass of sweet summer wine, a fine vintage from the Reach. The Arbor's cheese plate was conveniently placed within reach. "Lord Jaime," Olenna said, her voice softer than usual. "Lady Olenna," he replied, nodding and earning a smile from her. "Well, that's the pleasantries done with. Shall we begin?" Jaime laughed. He always enjoyed their conversations, even when they were playing a game. Olenna had a unique style, a way of cutting through the usual wordplay that he found tedious. While she could dance around topics and catch you off guard, there were no frills with Lady Olenna. She was direct and left no doubt about her feelings. "I think we shall. So, my lady, I'm curious why you wish to speak to me. My own talk with you was rendered moot when Loras told you about our trip north. Loras informed me of your meeting with the Lord Hand. I am aware, my lady. Why? Why what? Jaime asked, smirking. You know quite well what I mean. Why bring my grandson to such a meeting? Why tell him to inform me of it? What game are you playing, Lannister? Olenna's frustration bubbled to the surface, surprising them both. Do you wish me to be candid, my lady? Jaime asked, watching as Olenna huffed in annoyance. I do. Very well. The crown will bleed you dry, my lady. Take as much as you can give them, but they will never grant you what you truly desire. And given my nephew's disposition, even if they adhere to your requests, the prize isn't worth it. Olenna stared at him for a few moments, the silence in the room heavy. Most would find it unbearable, but they simply measured each other, until Olenna burst into laughter. You really are cleverer than I gave you credit for. Very well, if I were to withdraw my support for the crown, I assume you won't be stepping in to take my place? I will not. This regime, this king, the prince, my sister, they're all rotten to the core. I once served a mad king, Jaime said, taking a sip of his wine. I swore I'd do better next time. Olenna raised an eyebrow. So if it's not a Baratheon, then who do you support? My lady, there's candid, and then there's treasonous. Surely, this early in our relationship, we should stick to the former. Olenna burst out laughing. For now at least, my lord. For now. They chatted about trivial matters for a while, genuinely enjoying each other's company. Jaime mentioned that he'd instruct his brother to enhance cooperation on trade and possibly even open up the Essos trade to reach goods. But as they began to realize just how much coin the crown had borrowed from each of them, Jaime noticed Olenna shudder. When he recounted his meeting with the Hand, he watched her bristle, her anger surfacing. That duplicitous old falcon. I should go over there and give him a piece of my mind, Olenna said, her voice laced with fury. It took her only a moment to rein in her temper, which Jaime found incredibly impressive. She turned to him, a question on her lips, but seemed to discard it and asked another instead. That squire of yours, he's a good lad. Aye, both of them are, Jaime replied, surprised. Olenna smiled. That ridiculousness during the melee, Loras got hurt. Those boys needed to pay, they had to know what happens when you hurt a Tyrell. What the boy did, Jon, what he did for my grandson, if I don't get the chance to speak to him, would you give him my thanks? I will, my lady, though he'd not accept it. The boys are friends, they look out for one another. That's not something you can teach, though you might try. It's down to them. I'll tell him, but it would shame him to think you believed he did it for favor. You misunderstand me, I know he didn't. I'm not speaking here as Olenna Tyrell, Jaime began, I'm speaking as a concerned grandmother about her grandson. It seems that going west has benefited him, and I believe young Jon has played a significant role in that. I'm truly grateful. Jaime nodded, relieved he hadn't mentioned Jon's belief that Jon Arryn had sent the boys after him during the melee. He now understood how fiercely Olenna cared for her grandchildren. If she found out about Jon Arryn, he wouldn't last the night. My lady, I have 2 requests to make of you, he said. Really? So, we're doing favors for each other now. Olenna raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on her lips. I thought we already had. Jaime chuckled, earning a snort from her. I'd like to ask you to hold off on withdrawing your support from the crown until I return from the north. Wait, why would I wait? At the rate we're supporting them, it would cost us another 100,000 gold dragons to hold off until you come back. I'll cover the coin, Jaime replied, and Olenna gasped in surprise. It's that important to you? She asked. My lady, it is. Fine. We'll cover the cost ourselves. Consider it a step toward our future prosperity. Together, Olenna emphasized the last word. Very well, my lady. And the other request? Well, I'd like to add my winnings to Jon's to purchase more food. Really? I wouldn't have pegged charity as your strong suit. Perhaps not, Jaime admitted, but what he's doing, what your granddaughter is doing, they're better people than we are, my lady. You may be right. Very well, then. I shall match it as well. Marjorie has come up with some very good ideas. They do look good together, don't you think? Jaime smiled. Aye, my lady, they do. Meanwhile, Tyrion had spent almost a week going through the list his brother had given him. Each name proved to be immensely helpful. On the less friendly side, Peter Baelish was a tricky customer. While Tyrion had no problem with brothels, speaking to Chitaia revealed some unsettling practices. The man may be involved in something disturbing, but Jon Arryn had proven himself during the tourney. When Jaime recounted their conversation about money and the events of the melee, Tyrion felt his dislike for the man growing rapidly. It seemed the hand was far less honorable than one might assume. The commander of the Gold Cloaks, a frog-faced man named Jono Slint, was particularly loathsome. He was for sale to the highest bidder, and while that could sometimes be exploited, it also meant he would switch loyalties far too quickly. Tyrion had spoken to Elaine, who promised to arrange a change in the leadership of the Gold Cloaks. It was better to have an honest man in charge than one who would sell himself to anyone. He'd already dealt with a couple of Captain Viler's guards who had turned their cloaks, a tax collector who had been fired, and a harbor master who had been removed with ease. The most surprising name on his list was one he had known before arriving, the spider, Varys. He had looked forward to a confrontation with the man, only to be disappointed when he didn't see him upon arrival. Even when he finally did catch a glimpse, it was brief, and Varys had that uncanny ability to disappear at will. "We're here, my lord," his guard announced as Tyrion stepped out of the carriage. "Are the others already inside?" he asked. "Aye, my lord. Lady Jenna and Lord Kevin arrived just before us, while Lord Geryon has been here most of the morning." "Very good. Let's go see if Fish apologize," Tyrion replied, prompting laughter from his guards. As he walked, he pondered the other side of the list, the allies. Elaine was a godsend, with a knack for ferreting out information. Thanks to him, Tyrion was already further along in King's Landing than he had been in the West. Chitaia, initially reluctant, was more than willing to help once she learned he could offer protection against Baelish at no cost. The new harbor master was a man originally from. In the Westerlands, loyalty to the Lannisters was key, and Tyrion was more than happy to remain in their good graces. After all, he owed his promotion to them. From now on, Lannister ships would be exempt from the same searches as others, and they would have a clear view of everything that passed through the docks. As Tyrion entered the crowded throne room, a smile spread across his face. He had orchestrated things well, and now he was eager to watch Edmure Tully plead for Jon's forgiveness. He made his way toward his family, who were gathered near the front, waiting for the king and queen to arrive. Jon was engaged in conversation with the Tyrells, but when he spotted Tyrion, he nodded in acknowledgement. "About time you showed up," Jenna scolded him. "And, I'm a busy man with things to do," he replied playfully, but the raised eyebrow from his aunt quickly silenced his jest. "You think he'll really apologize?" Tyrion asked, glancing at his uncle. "Aye, he's got to. It's the king's order. Good enough for the sod, it's about time someone put those fish in their place," Geryon said bitterly. "You never told me what you have against them, uncle," Tyrion inquired. I didn't," Geryon replied, and the tone of his voice made it clear that the subject was closed. Tyrion was surprised to see Jaime enter alongside Lady Olenna and Loras, her two massive guards trailing behind. When Jaime reached Jon, he nodded to the Tyrells. Jon took a moment to speak with Lady Marjorie before Jaime approached them. After exchanging farewells with Lady Marjorie, Loras accompanied Jaime, while Jon appeared unusually anxious. As they approached, Tyrion caught sight of Edmure, who looked absolutely furious. Before he could greet his brother or the boys, the Hand and the masters of coin and ships arrived, taking their places by the throne. Moments later, the herald stepped forward and began to speak. His Grace, King Robert Baratheon, first of his name, King of the Undulls, Royner, and First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Lord Protector of the Realm, and Her Grace, Queen Cersei. Tyrion watched as the king and queen entered the chamber. Robert appeared bored, while Cersei wore a deep scowl. Tyrion couldn't help but smirk. His sister despised him, and for no reason other than blaming him for their mother's death. She could never accept that he would have gladly traded his life for hers, that he too had lost a mother at birth, and unlike her, he had no comforting memories to hold on to. He had tried to build a relationship with Cersei, longed for her love as much as he had yearned for their fathers. But it had become clear early on that neither would come to him. Instead, he took solace in the knowledge that she received no love herself. He possessed something she did not, the love of his family. He observed as they took their seats, two people who clearly loathed each other, trapped in a loveless marriage. At moments like this, his own longing for a wife would retreat to the deepest corners of his heart. Lord Tully, Jon Snow, come before the king, the herald announced, and Tyrion watched them both approach the throne. Lord Tully, having lost a joust to satisfy honor, you are now to apologize to Jon Snow as per the king's ruling, Lord Arryn declared. Tyrion noticed the hatred in Edmure Tully's eyes as he glanced at Jon. Silence stretched on, and Tyrion could hear the hushed whispers of the crowd. Still, not a word passed Edmure's lips. He could see the king growing agitated in his seat, even the Hand's expression had shifted. No longer was he glaring at Jon, instead, he was looking to Edmure with a beseeching look in his eyes. Yet still, Lord Tully remained silent. Finally, a voice broke through the tension, though not. Edmure spoke up, Your Grace, it seems Lord Tully is having difficulty apologizing to me. I can understand his hesitation, but as I mentioned, the apology isn't owed to me, it's to my mother and father. So, I forego any apology to myself as long as Lord Tully makes amends to them. Jon interjected, I, Lord Edmure Tully, am sincerely sorry for the insult I paid your mother and father and do hereby apologize publicly. The words were almost spat out. Tyrion observed the king's expression soften as he glanced around the room. Lords and ladies regarded Edmure with disgust while looking fondly at Jon. You heard the lad, Tully, the king commanded. Apologize to his parents, and make it a good one. Or so help me, I'll have you apologize on your knees. The room fell silent. On my mother and father's behalf, I accept your apology, Lord Tully, Jon replied. The king smiled at him. My lords and ladies, honor has been restored, and the matter is settled, the herald announced, just as Edmure turned and stormed out of the room. Tyrion watched as Cersei got up and left immediately. The king spoke to Jon, then slapped him on the back with a laugh as he exited. Tyrion turned to his uncle and brother, both staring at the door through which Edmure had just left. Meanwhile, Margaery walked with her family out of the throne room. A few moments later, she was joined by Jon and Loras. She had been frustrated with Lord Tully for refusing to apologize to Jon, especially after losing an honorable joust. But Jon had taken it all in stride, his parents' honor meant more to him than his own. She smiled as he nodded to her. Lord Mace, Lady Allery, he said, bowing to her father and kissing her mother's hand. Lady Olenna, he added, smirking when he kissed her grandmother's hand, surprised she had extended it. Lady Margaery, he said, and her stomach fluttered at the sound of his voice. Her lips brushed against his hand, and she smiled at him. Are you all right, Jon? She asked. I am, thank you, my lady, Jon replied, returning her smile. After exchanging a few words with her family, they finally said their goodbyes. Her grandmother had insisted they bring a large contingent of guards during their trips to the orphanages, and rather than argue, she had agreed. Jon, on the other hand, had only his 2 guards. However, with Loras's 2 and Ghost by his side, they were well protected. As they walked toward the carts, Ghost alternated between darting off and rushing back to lick her hand, completely unfazed by Jon's attempts to rein him in. "I swear that wolf does this just to annoy me," Jon said, and Ghost tilted his head, as if in response. "Yes, you big furball," Jon continued, just as the wolf jumped up and knocked him to the ground, eliciting laughter from both her and Loras. When they arrived at the first orphanage, Marjorie felt tears welling in her eyes. The children looked terrible, their clothes were tattered, and it was clear they hadn't had a proper meal in ages. She ordered her guards to immediately bring in the fruit. Apples, peaches, and pears were carried in by the basketful, and together she, Jon, and Loras began distributing the bounty. Seeing the joy on the youngest children's faces as they bit into a peach or an apple made her heart swell. "Can I feel your dog?" a small girl asked Jon, her mouth full of peach. "He's a wolf, but yes, if you're very careful," Jon replied. Taking the girl's hand, he led her over to Ghost. "He's soft," the girl said, her smile radiant as she touched the wolf's fur. He is, isn't he?" "He's a big furball," Jon said, and the wolf looked at him, shaking his head slightly. Marjorie watched the exchange, shifting her gaze between the wolf, Jon, and the girl. She noticed how Ghost seemed annoyed but allowed the children to pet him, more and more of them approaching once the little girl had shown it was safe. She observed as Jon spoke gently to the children, handing out fruit and bringing smiles to their faces. As Marjorie and Loras continued to distribute the fruit, they ensured every child received some. Afterward, Marjorie approached the woman who managed the orphanage, who stood in stunned silence as the bags of food were added to her stores. "I thank you, my lady. The little ones thank you. This will feed them for moons," the tall, thin woman said with a smile. "What's your name?" Marjorie asked. "Sala, milady." "Sala, when this runs out, be sure to speak to Darren at the Tyrell warehouse. He'll ensure you get another delivery," Marjorie replied. The woman nearly broke into tears, her gratitude evident as she looked over to see Jon, much to Ghost's annoyance, allowing larger groups of children to pet the wolf. "What you and the young lord have done here, milady, may the blessings of the seven be upon you both." "It's just Jon and Marjorie, Sala," she said, walking over to join Jon and Ghost. They visited 4 more orphanages that day, and by the time they returned to the Red Keep, darkness was settling in. Marjorie had never felt this sense of accomplishment before, this feeling of truly making a difference. She glanced at Jon and saw that he shared her sentiment. Loras had left after the second orphanage, wanting to stay but needing to fulfill a promise to Lord Jaime regarding a meeting that afternoon. For the first time she could remember, Marjorie was actually happy to see her brother go. Spending the rest of the day with Jon had been incredible. While Loras was often a bit too protective, Jon, though concerned, seemed to give her more freedom. He allowed her to make her own choices while always keeping a watchful eye. At one point, she had decided to explore one of the orphanages to see the living conditions of the children. Had Loras been there, he would have insisted on accompanying her. But Jon had trusted her to walk alone with the lady in charge, although she noticed Ghost following closely behind. Now, as their day came to an end, her feet ached, and she longed for a warm bath. It was the night of the end feast, and she wanted to look her best. Fortunately, she wouldn't be accompanying the. As they approached the Red Keep, Marjorie felt a flutter of hope that she might finally get her dance with Jon. When they turned to say their goodbyes, she noticed that Jon had been just as affected by their day as she was. She had told him about the filthy beds the children slept in, the threadbare blankets, and he responded with something that struck her as unusual. "Then is it not our duty to make it better? To do better for them, if not for ourselves?" Tonight, they would feast and dance, watching as people wasted food and spent coins frivolously while, just streets away, children were going to bed hungry. Tomorrow, they would visit those who had it even worse than the children they had seen. Surely, it was the responsibility of those with means to do better, to give more, and to help those in need. Jon looked at her, moving closer to brush a strand of hair from her face, smiling softly. "Do you think we helped today?" she asked, forcing a smile. I do." Those kids were smiling, Marjorie. "We did that." "You did that." "I want to do more, Jon." "We will." "Will I get my dance tonight, just Jon?" she asked, her smile becoming more genuine. "Of course, just Marjorie." As they prepared for the feast, Loras couldn't help but feel that getting ready was more of a chore than he had anticipated. He had thought his mother was fussy, but she was nothing compared to Jenna. The woman had an almost obsessive passion for details. "Your hair has to be right, your clothes pristine, and your boots shined and polished," she insisted. Loras prided himself on his appearance and always aimed to look good, but Jenna's fussing made it seem like he was dressed in rags. No, no, no. This won't do at all. That doublet is all wrong. Where is your other one? Loras, are you listening? It's here, Lady Jenna. I thought the blue one looked better. Did you now? And what are your house colors, Loras? Green and gold, Lady Jenna. Indeed. And this is a feast in front of a king. Have you not noticed how? We're all dressed, Loras remarked, taking in the scene around him. He had never seen so much red and gold in his life. Jaime wore a striking crimson doublet with gold trim, while Jenna dazzled in a beautiful red dress adorned with golden stones that glimmered in the light. The only one who had managed to escape the color scheme was Jon, who, as usual, wore black. But this time, he'd added a red shirt, which Loras had to admit was quite striking. Here it is, now put this on at once, Jenna said, handing him a green doublet threaded with gold, featuring a rose over where his heart would be. Is he still not ready? Loras, really, we have a feast to attend, Jon said mockingly as he entered the room. Don't even start. Was I not in your room just an hour ago doing the very same thing? A white shirt, really, Jon? You need to add some color to your attire, Jenna chastised, and Loras couldn't help but snicker. After a few more moments, to his embarrassment, Jenna actually brushed his hair while Jon struggled to hold back laughter. Finally, they were ready. Earlier, he had accompanied Jon to the city gates, where they set Ghost free in the Kingswood. The wolf had taken off faster than he'd ever seen. With the children also joining them, at least for the early part of the feast, there was no one for the wolf to stay with. After watching Jon kneel down to look into Ghost's eyes, his friend had suggested letting the wolf run free. Every time he saw Jon with Ghost, he marveled at their connection, whistles, head movements, and sometimes even less, and suddenly the wolf would respond as if following commands. It was the same with Winter. They had a bond that Loras couldn't even begin to understand, something the joust had made clear. How Jon had managed to stay on his mare was beyond him. Had it been him or even Jaime, they would have fallen. But somehow, Jon stayed upright and landed his hit. What's going through that empty little head of yours? Jon nudged him playfully with his shoulder. What? Nothing. Loras mumbled, but Jon burst into laughter before joining him. Jon, what a pretty dress. Joy exclaimed as she spotted them walking down the corridor. It is, isn't it? A pretty dress for a pretty girl, Jon replied, kneeling to talk to her. He held her hand and led her down the corridor, where Jaime, Jerian, and the others were waiting. The carriages were all ready to go. Jon and Loras climbed into the carriage with Jaime and Jerian, while Joy joined them instead of Jenna, Emmon, and their children. Kevin and Tyrion settled into the other carriage with Kevin's family. The trip to the Red Keep was short, and Loras watched with amusement as Jon kept Joy engaged, pointing out the buildings they passed and the stars twinkling in the sky beyond the window. When they finally arrived and entered the keep, they walked through the corridors, passing a few people who pointed at Jon and whispered. The story of the joust and his apology had spread like wildfire. Are you going to look this glum all night? Jon asked, pulling Loras from his thoughts. I'm not glum, Loras replied, his tone betraying him. Joy, Loras is sad. Why don't you give him a hug? I'm not, he started, but Joy was already standing in front of him, looking up with wide eyes. Kneeling down, he was suddenly enveloped in a warm hug. He realized he wasn't sad or glum at all. If he had been, he certainly wasn't anymore. Is Loras better now? Joy asked, looking at him earnestly. Thanks, Joy, he said, and the little girl beamed at him before skipping over to Jon, taking his hand as they entered the ballroom. Loras nodded at Lady Olenna, who was seated with her family at the front table. Their own table was on the other side of the room, with the Vale and River Lords gathered in the center. Once again, the Northerners had been placed at the back. He glanced over at Daisy Mormont, who cut a striking figure. Fierce on the melee field, she now looked equally at home in her elegant dress and beautifully styled hair. The moment only highlighted how beautiful she truly was. Jaime coughed and spluttered when she turned and caught him staring. He'd been lost in thought, and his composure had slipped away. Wiping his chin, he glanced back and found her smiling at him. He nodded politely and returned the smile. His uncle tapped him on the shoulder and nodded toward the northern woman, who was now chatting with her cousin. Jaime took a deep breath, bracing himself for his uncle's inevitable teasing. She's a pretty one, isn't she? Jerian remarked. Who? Jaime replied, feigning ignorance. Don't play coy with me. The northern lass, Mormont, is it? Daisy. Daisy, Jerian said, a smirk creeping onto his face that made Jaime squirm. Will she be, traveling with you when you head north? Jaime didn't need to look to know his uncle was grinning. The whole northern party will be traveling together. Strength in numbers and all that. Convenient, that, Jerian said, raising an eyebrow. Jaime turned to face him. What is? You all traveling together. It's convenient, should shave a lot of time off their journey north. It should, Jaime replied, glancing back at the northern table, oblivious to the smirk on his uncle's face. Luckily for him, something else caught Jerian's attention just then. Edmure Tully made his entrance, surprising Jaime, Jerian, and most of the ballroom, as it had gone quiet in anticipation. Many had expected him to retreat to Riverrun, avoiding the embarrassment his actions had caused, but here he was, striding confidently to his table. Both Jaime and Jerian turned to see if Jon had noticed. If he had, the boy was hiding it well, sitting at the end of their table, engrossed in a game that had Joy and the children laughing hysterically. Jaime glanced back at Tully, who was watching with a look of hatred that thankfully Jerian didn't see. Moments later, the king, queen, and hand made their entrance. When Jaime arrived, he nearly burst out laughing at the sight of Cersei walking alongside Stannis, both of them trying to outglare each other. Robert looked as if he'd rather be anywhere else than accompanying Celis, whose superior demeanor was somewhat undermined by the mustache on her upper lip. Behind them, Jon Arryn strolled with his wife, her eyes darting around the room before finally settling on the Master of Coin, who did not return her smile. Once they were seated, the feast commenced. Jaime glanced down at the second course of deer and found himself longing for something else to eat. He picked at the vegetables on his plate and turned his gaze back to the northern table, where Daisy was laughing heartily at something her cousin's wife had said. When she caught him looking, he smiled at her, holding her gaze, and this time, he was ready when she smiled back. Jon, on the other hand, was struggling with his appetite. He had only nibbled at his food, eating just enough to ensure that Joy, the little girl beside him, was happy. She lit up with joy when the desserts arrived. Most of the evening was spent playing with the children, though he occasionally glanced over at the Reach table, where Marjorie was looking back at him. Both of them were eager for the feast to end so they could roam freely around the room. After finishing their desserts, Jenna led the children to the carriages. Jon rode back with them, helping to tuck them in for the night. After reading Joy her story, he returned to his room and checked on his egg. It had been acting strangely over the past couple of days, seeming to shy away from the fire's heat. He had found a large chest to place it in. Even at night, while he slept, the egg still needed to be cradled, but Jon couldn't understand why the fire seemed less important now. He could still feel it moving inside, still felt its presence deep within him, but it felt different, almost as if it were at peace or resting for the time being. "Make sure Emmon doesn't drink too much, will you, Jon?" Jenna said as he prepared to head back to the feast. "Are you not coming back, Lady Jenna?" "No, I find I have no stomach for that room tonight." "I think I'll turn in early tonight," Jon said. "Are you all right?" "Do you need me to get you anything?" he asked, concern lacing his voice. "No, thanks, Jon. I'm fine. I just think I'm looking forward to going back home." She offered him a small smile. He nodded, then turned to head back to the feast. Jors and Allers were waiting outside, and the three of them decided to walk together. King's Landing at night felt different. Jon wondered where everyone had gone. The streets were nearly empty except for the occasional gold cloak. It surprised him. In Lannisport, the nights were alive with activity, bustling with people enjoying themselves. Here, it was eerily quiet. When they arrived back at the ballroom, Jon was relieved to see that the feast had ended. People were milling about, chatting amiably. He spotted Loras sitting with his family but first made his way to Jaime and Jerian to let them know that Jenna wouldn't be returning. Once that was done, he approached the Reach table, passing by the River Lords. To his surprise, none of them glared at him, even Edmure Tully looked away rather than meet his gaze. "Where did you sneak off to?" Loras asked, pulling out a chair beside him and Marjorie. "Lady Jenna took the children back to the manse, so I helped her," Jon replied. "You mean you had to go read Joy her story?" Loras laughed. I did. "Lady Marjorie, it's a pleasure to see you tonight." Jon smiled as Marjorie turned to him. "You too, Jon." They chatted for a few moments before the tables were cleared away and the dancing began. Jon turned to Marjorie, who was looking directly at him. He wanted nothing more than to ask her to dance, to disregard propriety and simply follow his heart. But he knew it was Marjorie's reputation that would be at stake, not his own. Fortunately, Loras had an idea. "I think it'd be nice to explore a little, don't you?" Loras suggested, raising his eyebrow in a way that reminded Jon of Marjorie. "Brother, that's a fine idea, don't you agree, Jon?" "I do," he replied, smiling at the lopsided grin on Marjorie's face. He knew Loras hadn't come up with this plan at all. "Grandmother, mother, we're going for a walk," Marjorie announced, and Jon was surprised when Lady Olenna raised no objections. "Very well, sweetling. Just make sure you take your guards with you," Lady Allery said. As they left the room, Jon nodded to Small Jon, who was giving him a curious look, eyebrows raised and a smirk on his face. Goatsbane looked ridiculous. Daisy and Lyness both smiled at them, and Jon thought they should speak with them once they returned, a suggestion he shared with Marjorie, who readily agreed. If he had glanced at the high table, he would have seen very different expressions directed his way, as Lord Arryn and the Crown Prince wore matching looks of disgust and disdain. Jon led the way, unsure of his destination, but to his surprise, he found himself in the same room where he had been during the opening feast. He walked to the double doors, opened them, and stepped outside with Loras and Marjorie. His eyes were immediately drawn to a small hole in the wall where he had seen Balerion. Now he was certain the cat was the same one his sister owned, the one whose eyes he had looked through. "Are you all right, Jon?" Marjorie asked, concern lacing her voice. "What?" "Oh, I'm fine. I've been here before," Jon said, trying to shake the memories from his mind. "When?" Loras asked as they settled down. "Oh, during the opening night's feast. I came out here because I needed some air." He glanced at Marjorie, who looked back at him, and after a moment, she smiled as she realized the significance of his words. Well, as fun as this is, I'm heading back, Loras said, his subtlety clearly not his strong suit. Loras, Marjorie scolded. Sorry, he replied before quickly scurrying off. He was supposed to be more circumspect than that, Marjorie sighed. Well, the result is the same, so I don't mind, Jon said, delighted at the unexpected turn of events. Jon extended his hand to Marjorie with a playful smile. Would you do me the honor of a dance, just Marjorie? It would be my pleasure, just Jon, she replied, taking his hand. Though the music was barely audible, it didn't matter. They lost themselves in the moment, dancing together for a few blissful moments. As they moved, a thought struck Jon. One day, he would dance with her openly, not in secret, but in front of everyone, free from the fear of judgment. The idea should have filled him with joy, but it was quickly overshadowed by guilt. He realized that while he wasn't lying outright, he was omitting the truth. He was keeping secrets from Marjorie and Loras, both of whom meant so much to him. The urge to confess bubbled within him, to reveal who he really was and the truth about his parentage. But doubt crept in. He needed to speak to Jaime, to Barristan, anyone who could guide him. Marjorie noticed the shift in his expression. Concern etched on her face. She asked, Jon, are you sure you're all right? I was just thinking about something, he replied, scrambling for a distraction. Just then, Marjorie let out a startled shriek. Jon instinctively stepped in front of her, and within moments, both their guards rushed to their sides. Are you all right, my lady? One guard asked, his gaze fierce as it landed on Jon. I am fine, Marjorie assured them. I thought I saw something in the corner, a rat or something. Jon noticed her hand was shaking as he held it. The guards checked the corner but found nothing. After receiving Marjorie's reassurance, they stepped back, leaving the two of them alone again. Are you sure you're all right, Marjorie? We can go back if you wish, Jon offered, concern still lingering. No, I'm fine. Let's sit for a moment, she said. They settled down, and after ensuring Marjorie was feeling better, Jon walked to the corner where the disturbance had occurred. There, he spotted a black cat looking up at him. Jon looked at the black cat and felt a warmth in his heart. His sister had loved this cat, and he found himself growing fond of it too. He bent down, scooping the cat up. To his surprise, it didn't hiss this time. As he gazed deeply into its eyes, he sensed a connection between them, reminiscent of the bond he shared with Ghost and Winter. As he walked back to Marjorie, he noticed her gasp when she saw the cat in his hands. He nodded at her, hoping she wouldn't shriek again, and felt relieved when she didn't. Marjorie, this is Balerion. Balerion, this is Marjorie, he introduced, watching as the cat purred under her gentle touch. The next morning, Jon awoke to find himself wrapped around his egg, with Balerion sleeping peacefully on his bed. Looking down, he spotted Ghost staring at him with a curious expression. Don't worry, you big furball, I love you too, Jon reassured him, and Ghost rolled over, inviting him to pet him. After finding Balerion, he and Marjorie had spent nearly an hour talking. He was delighted by how well the cat had taken to her, even crawling from Jon's arms to Nestle in Marjorie's lap. But when they returned to the party, the cat became agitated, and Jon decided he wouldn't let it out of his sight. He was determined to take Balerion away from that place, from those people. Reluctantly, he said his goodbyes to Marjorie, knowing they would see each other again later that day, and made his way back to the manse. Just as they left the Red Keep, he felt an urge to head toward the gates. So, he, Jors, and Allers went there, and moments after they arrived, Ghost appeared, his fur speckled with blood from whatever he had hunted. Jon braced himself for a reaction between Ghost and the cat, anticipating trouble. To his surprise, Ghost gently rested his head on Balerion's stomach. There was silence between them, not a peep from either. Satisfied, Jon got up to prepare for the day, carefully placing the egg back in the chest, feeling content. Jon thought about one thing: since the change, he might not need to lock his doors anymore. He called out to a servant to prepare a bath. Both Ghost and Balerion were in dire need of a good cleaning. Dressing in his oldest clothes, he helped fill the tub and decided to wash the cat first. Once he rinsed Balerion, it was as if he had transformed the creature. The cat emerged looking entirely different, as though he had cleansed its very soul rather than just its fur. Balerion seemed more vibrant, and dare he say, happier. Ghost, however, was a different story. The wolf despised baths, preferring to leap into a river or stream instead. But Jon was determined, and he managed to wash Ghost as well. After finishing, Jon changed into better clothes. With Ghost at his side and Balerion in his arms, he headed to the dining room for breakfast. He had barely stepped inside when Joy approached, her eyes lighting up with curiosity at the sight of the black cat he was holding. "Present for me, Jon?" she asked, reaching out to Balerion. Jon watched as the cat practically leaped into her arms, prompting delighted giggles from the girl. Balerion purred loudly, nuzzling against her. "Joy, this is Balerion. I need you to look after him for me," Jon explained. "Balon, pretty Jon," Joy giggled, as the cat licked her hand. "It's Balerion, Joy," he corrected her, only to receive a look that said, "I just said that." "Come on, Balon," Joy said, turning away. Jon couldn't help but laugh as she sat at the table, starting to feed the cat. Ghost looked up at him with a forlorn expression, clearly feeling that his prime source of bacon and sausages had been usurped. "Come on, Furball, I'll feed you," Jon said, reassuring his loyal companion. After breakfast, ensuring that Ghost didn't feel neglected, Jon decided to speak with Jaime before meeting Marjorie. When Jaime caught sight of the cat, Jon had never seen such a look of sheer panic. Jaime practically fled the room, skipping breakfast and retreating to his own chambers. Jon knocked on Jaime's door and entered to find him sitting at his desk, gazing out the window, completely unaware of Jon's presence. Jon stepped into the room. "My lord," he called softly. When there was no reply, he raised his voice. "My lord, where did you find him?" Jaime remained turned away. "The Red Keep, my lord. At the opening feast and then again last night." "You know whose he was?" Jon asked. My lord. I saw it." At that, Jaime spun around quickly, and Jon noticed the tears in his eyes. "Saw it? How could? What do you mean you saw it?" "Through Balerion's eyes, my lord. I saw it. I saw her. I saw what they did, what he did." Jon sank heavily into a chair. "I don't understand." "Wait, what do you mean, he?" "Amory Lorch. He was the man who killed my sister." Jon watched as anger replaced the sadness on Jaime's face. "I never knew. I mean, there were stories of the mountain, but Rhaenys. I never knew who." "I know, my lord. It doesn't matter." "What do you mean it doesn't matter?" "Of course, it matters," Jaime exclaimed. "It doesn't matter, my lord, because I'm going to kill him," Jon said, his determination clear. For a moment, Jaime looked taken aback by the intensity in Jon's eyes. "Amory Lorch is mine, my lord. I'm going to kill him, me, no one else. For my sister. For Rhaenys." "For Rhaenys," Jaime echoed, nodding. "What about the mountain?" "I think there's someone else who deserves justice too, don't you, my lord?" Jon replied, and Jaime nodded. Olenna had been contemplating her own choices. When she told her granddaughter about Jaime Lannister's intentions with his winnings and that she would match his donation, the hug she received nearly took her breath away. The smile on her granddaughter's face was enough to warm even Olenna's cynical heart. She was too good for this world, she would make a perfect queen. Ever since her conversation with Jaime Lannister, Olenna had been torn about what to do. She wanted to work more closely with the Lannisters, to grow strong together, but she wondered if that would be enough. whenever she thought of withdrawing or threatening to withdraw. As Olenna contemplated the crown's support, she wondered if Jon Arryn would finally come forward with a betrothal offer. Would she accept it, knowing what she did about the prince? Looking at her granddaughter, she knew she could never allow Margaery to marry that monster. But he wasn't the only prince. Perhaps a compromise could be reached. "Grandmama, I'm off to meet Jon. Are you sure you won't come?" Margaery asked. "Me, go to Flea Bottom? Are you serious, child?" "I'm half a mind to forbid you from going," Olenna replied. "Grandmother," Margaery said with determination, "I won't be stopped. But don't think I haven't considered it. Now, go run along and please be careful, sweetling." Olenna smiled as Margaery kissed her cheek before rushing off. Once her granddaughter had left, Olenna set to work. She had letters to write and ravens to send, one to Ned Stark in the north. Jaime Lannister would no doubt inform them about the visit, but he was bringing her grandson along, and she would ensure that the Lord of Winterfell treated Loras with the respect his station deserved. Olenna also wanted to speak to Willis when she returned to Highgarden. It was time to find out what the dragons in the east were up to and what their connection was to Jaime Lannister. After spending an hour writing missives, some benign, some not, she sent a servant to fetch her son. Though she would only share minimal information with Mace, he still needed to know her thoughts. Otherwise, he might give the crown everything to make Margaery queen. It took him far longer than it should have to arrive, and by the time he sat down, Olenna was fuming. But when he spoke, her anger subsided. "I'm sorry, Mother. I was seeing Margaery off," Mace said, pride swelling in his voice. "I hope you sent enough guards with her?" Olenna asked. "Oh, I did, Mother." "She has more than enough," he replied. "Good. Now we must speak about the crown." "Of course, Mother. I'm pressing as hard as I can." "I believe we'll be getting word soon," Mace assured her. Olenna shook her head. "I don't trust Mace, so I want you to press harder. Tell Jon Arryn that our support is not guaranteed. We must look to our own people." Mace nodded. "Use those exact words, Mace. You understand?" "I do, Mother. I'll do as you say." "I know you will." Once Mace left, Olenna felt at a loss for how to spend the rest of her day. Then an idea struck her. Calling for Left, she instructed him to have her litter readied. A trip to Flea Bottom might not be such a bad idea after all. Meanwhile, Jon was surprised by the number of guards Margaery had brought with her. His own two seemed pitiful in comparison, though he wouldn't trade Jors and Allers for anyone else. Margaery looked a bit embarrassed by the numbers, but Jon knew her family was only ensuring her safety. What surprised him most was the look on her face. She seemed more excited than she had been yesterday during their visit to the orphanages. "Jon, I have the most wonderful news," she exclaimed, her smile beaming. "What is it?" he asked. "Grandmother just told me that Lord Jaime donated his winnings to us, and she will match it. We'll be able to help so many more people, Jon. Think of all we could do. It's not just food. We can provide healers, better supplies for the orphanages, and even get books and toys for the children." Jon was stunned. Jaime had won 20,000 gold dragons in the joust, and if Lady Olenna was matching that, it meant they would have 40,000 gold dragons to spend on the people of King's Landing. That was incredible. What they had already spent had made a huge difference, but this would make an enormous one. Unable to contain his excitement, he grabbed Margaery and spun her around, her giggles making him realize what he had done. "I'm sorry, Margaery," he said, feeling embarrassed. "Don't be. It was fine. I enjoyed it," she said coyly. They stood looking at each other in silence for a moment before bursting into giggles, only stopping when they noticed their guards watching them with curious expressions. When Ghost nudged Jon, he realized it was time to focus on their mission. As they made their way to the building they had rented in Flea Bottom, they couldn't help but steal glances at each other, and the giggles would start all over again. Upon arriving, their guards and the procession of carts quickly attracted a crowd. Jon glanced at Marjorie, and she nodded, encouraging him to stand up and speak. As he rose, he could hear whispers ripple through the crowd. "It's the White Wolf. It's him who beat the fish. What's he doing here?" Jon cleared his throat, and Ghost stood protectively beside him, quieting the crowd. "Men and women of Flea Bottom," Jon began, "my name is Jon Snow, and this lady beside me," he gestured to Marjorie, "is Lady Marjorie Tyrell." "Why should we care what you're called, boy?" a voice shouted from the crowd. "What's you doing here?" another voice chimed in loudly. "You're right, you shouldn't care who I am or even who Lady Marjorie is under normal circumstances," Jon replied, his voice steady. "But today, you should. Would you like to know why?" He watched as curiosity replaced the skepticism on many faces. "All right then, tell us already," someone called out, prompting even Jon to chuckle along with the crowd. "For too long, people have cared little for those who live here, spending their coin on fine wines and clothes, while families go hungry, and children cry themselves to sleep with empty bellies. After winning the duels, I was awarded a prize of 5,000 gold dragons. What should I do with that? Spend it on fancy clothes like others would, or come here and do what anyone should do, help those who need it most? I choose to come here to help. Lady Marjorie and her family have chosen to come here to help. So starting today, and once a week. For as long as we can, we or the people we send will come here to help," Jon said, holding up a parcel. Inside were dried foods, some fruit, and a bit of meat, enough to last a week or so. He noticed a woman standing nearby, holding a little girl by the hand, and motioned for them to come closer. "What's your name?" he asked the little girl, who glanced nervously at her mother. "Sarah, my lord, milady," the girl replied, her lip quivering. "I'm no lord, just Jon," he said with a smile. "And the lady is just Marjorie." He then handed her the package.